The night was dark and I was lost. I remember the feeling of falling not just physically but within myself. It was the winter of 1960, and I was in Minneapolis, a city that felt as cold on the inside as it did on the outside. I had a guitar, a few songs, and a dream that seemed to be slipping away. I was Bob Dylan, or at least that's what I told myself. But who was I, really? I had come to Minneapolis with a clear mission, to be Woody Guthrie. Woody was my hero, the voice of the people, the man who sang about the struggles and dreams of everyday folks. I wanted to be him, to feel what he felt, to sing what he sang. I had left my old life behind, my name, my family, and everything that tied me down. I was just a kid from Hibbing, but I had a fire inside me that burned for something more. John Pankake was a mentor, a friend, and a critic. He was the one who first told me, "You're trying hard, but you'll never turn into Woody Guthrie. Jack Elliott's already been where you are and gone." It felt like a punch in the gut. I had never heard of Jack Elliott, but Pankake played his records for me, and I heard a leaner, meaner version of Woody. Elliott wasn't just imitating, he was creating something new. I felt small, insignificant, and for a moment I wanted to give up, but giving up wasn't in my nature. I had come too far to turn back. I started listening to Elliott, trying to understand what made him different. Pankake was right. I couldn't be Woody Guthrie. I wasn't even close to being Jack Elliott, but I was me, and maybe that was the key. I had to find my own voice, my own way of singing the songs that mattered to me. The more I tried to be someone else, the more I realized that I was just a shadow of my own potential. I felt like a ghost, wandering through a city that didn't understand me. I was lost, but I was also free. Free to explore, to learn, and to become something new. Pankake's words stung, but they also pushed me to dig deeper, to find the real me. I started to play differently, to write differently, to think differently. I wasn't just imitating anymore, I was creating. I was still influenced by Woody and Elliott, but I was also influenced by the world around me, by the people I met, by the stories I heard. I was becoming a songwriter, not just a singer. One night, Pankake heard me play again. He said, "You used to be imitating Guthrie, and now you're imitating Elliott. Do you think you're equivalent to him?" It was a challenge, and I knew he was right. I couldn't just be a copy of someone else. I had to be myself, and that meant finding my own path. So, I did what I could with what I had where I was. I didn't have much, but I had a guitar, a voice, and a dream. I started to write songs that were mine, songs that came from deep inside me. They weren't perfect, but they were honest. I was still trying to figure out who I was, but I was no longer trying to be someone else. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it. I knew I wasn't just a kid from Hibbing anymore. I was Bob Dylan, and I was going to make my mark on the world. I moved to New York City with a dream. I was looking for something more, something that felt like a part of my education I never got. Growing up in the Midwest, I was surrounded by a culture that valued practical skills and the rhythms of nature. It was a place where people didn't talk much about big ideas or the past. They just got on with life. But I felt like there was a whole world of knowledge and culture that I was missing out on. In New York, I found what I was looking for. The city was like a treasure chest of high culture. I discovered the works of great thinkers and writers from the past, people like Tacitus, Pericles, Thucydides, Gogol, Balzac, Maupassant, Hugo, Dickens, Machiavelli, Dante, and Ovid. These names were like a new language to me, and I was hungry to learn more. I wanted to understand the world in a different way, to connect with the ideas that shaped human history. But New York wasn't just about books. It was also the place where the folk singers I admired lived. I was drawn to Greenwich Village, which I saw as the heart of the folk music scene. I wanted to meet the people who were keeping alive the spirit of American folk music, and Woody Guthrie was at the top of that list. Woody was like a hero to me, and I felt a strong connection to his music and his message. I even moved to New York partly because I wanted to meet him. When I got to the city, it was overwhelming. New York was a web too intricate to understand. I didn't try to figure it all out. Instead, I explored the city, the people, and the music. I spent a lot of time at the Folklore Center, which felt like an ancient chapel. It was a place where I could dive into the rich history of folk music. I listened to old records, read songbooks, and played instruments I had never touched before. It was like being in a different world, a world where the past and the present merged. I started playing at the Café Wa, a small, subterranean club. It was a big deal for me to get a gig there. Fred Neil, a famous folk singer, even let me play harmonica with him. It was a small start, but it felt like the beginning of something big. I was driven by a sense that there was something out there waiting for me, something that would change my view of the world. I read a lot of poetry during this time. I loved the sound of the words, the way they rolled off my tongue. I read Byron, Shelley, Longfellow, and Poe out loud, and it felt like I was discovering a new way to express myself. The rhythmic cadence of the poems spoke to me, and I realized that this was the kind of creativity I wanted to bring to my music. I wasn't just writing songs, I was crafting poetry set to music. New York was a place of contrasts. On one hand, it was a city of high culture and intellectual pursuits. On the other hand, it was a place where different people from all walks of life came together. I met artists, writers, and musicians who were as restless and curious as I was. We were all searching for something, trying to find our place in the world. I didn't have a concrete identity back then. I was a rambler, a gambler, and a long way from home. I tried on different personas, different styles of music, and different ways of thinking. I was like a chameleon, absorbing everything around me and integrating it into my own voice. I was always moving, always changing, always looking for the next thing that would spark my creativity. New York was where I found my passion, my purpose, and my voice. It was a city of endless possibilities, and I was determined to make the most of every moment. I wanted to be like Picasso, who fractured the art world and changed everything. I wanted to create something new, something that would make people feel their own emotions, something that would leave a mark on the world. And in those early days, I felt like anything was possible. I used to feel like the modern world was a cage, a place where everything was too neat and tidy, leaving no room for the wild and the mysterious. The folklore center was different. It was a place where the old stories lived, where the magic and the myths that had been pushed aside by the cold light of reason still thrived. These stories weren't just tales. They were a way of seeing the world that challenged the tidy boxes of modern life. They spoke of the sea, the Wild West, old churches, and children's stories, places where the rules of the world didn't always apply. They were a refuge from the harsh realities of racism, classism, and imperialism, places where the heart and the soul could breathe. I wasn't drawn to the modern world. It didn't speak to me. Instead, I found myself drawn to the past, to stories like the sinking of the Titanic, the Galveston flood, and the legend of John Henry. These stories were my reality, more real to me than the present. They helped me see that the world I lived in was just a phase, a transient dream that could be changed. I was searching for a way to express the complexity of my feelings, to find a voice that could convey the depth of my experiences. The past became my teacher, guiding me to a new way of seeing and being. In early 1961, I set my sights on playing at the Gaslight, a place that felt like a secret, a hidden treasure. It wasn't just about the prestige, it was about the atmosphere. The Gaslight had a mystique, a closed circle that was hard to break into. But I felt drawn to it, like it was a place where I could truly be myself. When I finally got the chance to play there, I focused on the present moment, not thinking about the past or the future. I owned the songs I played, pouring my heart and soul into each one. I wasn't trying to get people to like me. I was trying to bring the songs to life, to explore the universe through them. It was about getting to the core of the song, to the inner substance of the thing, to a place where the song could take me to a different, more liberated reality. At the Gaslight, I was surrounded by characters who were also looking for that inner heat, that transformative energy. I felt like I was sitting on the crest of a cliff, seeing everything from a higher perspective. I knew I was different from the others, and that difference allowed me to see the world in a unique way. I wasn't just performing. I was exploring the depths of the human experience, trying to uncover the truths that lay hidden beneath the surface. I was also deeply influenced by the poets, like Byron and Coleridge. Their way with words, their ability to push the boundaries of language, resonated with me. I trained my mind to think like them, to combine their poetic style with the folk songs I loved. It was a natural synthesis, a blending of two worlds that had never been brought together before. The result was something new, something that felt like it belonged to a different time and place, but was also deeply relevant to the present. The beat poets, with their focus on breaking free from the constraints of modern life, were an inspiration, but I felt their rejection of the past was incomplete. I saw the way out not in rejecting the past, but in embracing it, in reviving the archaic ways of thinking that had been lost. The folk songs I loved were a window into a world where life was epic, where the characters were larger than life, and where the world was filled with meaning. In this world, the individual wasn't just a cog in a machine. They were a hero, a mythic figure capable of great deeds. I began to feel like a character from these songs, to think like one. I was living in a parallel universe, a mythical realm that was more real to me than the modern world. I was discovering a reality of a more brilliant dimension, a world where the archetypes of the past still held power. The figures in these songs, the outlaws, the gospel singers, the mythic heroes, were filled with a natural wisdom that seemed to defy the reductive views of modernity. They were part of a full spectrum of experience, a world that was more true to life than life itself. The modern world, with its focus on science and rationality, had pushed these old ways of thinking to the margins, but I found them too powerful to ignore. I was determined to bring them back, to create something new out of the old. I cut myself off from the mainstream, from the people who didn't understand, and I focused on my vision. I didn't have time to explain myself to journalists or critics. I just needed to create. And that's what I did, drawing on everything I had learned, everything I had absorbed, to create a new template, a new way of seeing and being in the world. I remember the day I saw Mike Seeger perform. Mike was Pete Seeger's half-brother and a master of traditional folk music. His performance was so powerful that it made me realize how much more there was to music than just playing the right notes. Mike's music wasn't just about the song. It was about making the audience forget themselves and become one with the music. It was like a magic trick, but instead of making things disappear, he made people's worries and ego melt away. Watching Mike play was a turning point for me. I realized that I had been focusing too much on the mechanics of singing and playing my guitar, trying to perfect every little detail, but there was something missing. I was closing myself off to the bigger picture, and that wasn't going to help me grow as a musician. That's when I knew I had to change. I had to believe in new possibilities and be willing to take risks. I felt like I needed to shake things up, like Arthur Rimbaud said, and disorientate myself. I had to step out of my comfort zone and explore new ways of thinking and creating. It was like learning to swim in a different kind of water. It was scary, but I knew it was necessary. I was living in a time when America was changing, and I felt a sense of destiny. I knew I had to ride the wave of change, not just swim in it. I wanted to write songs that were more than just performances. I wanted to write songs that captured the spirit of the times and pushed the boundaries of what folk music could be. One of the first big changes I made was changing my name. I went from being Robert Zimmerman to Bob Dylan. It wasn't just a name change. It was a way of reinventing myself. I wanted to break free from the person I had been and become someone new. I tried out different names like Elston Gunn and Robert Allen, but they just didn't feel right. I wanted a name that was both familiar and mysterious, something that would capture people's attention. Then I came across the name Dylan Thomas, the Welsh poet. The name Dylan felt right, exotic, and inscrutable. I thought about it a lot, considering how it sounded, how it looked on paper, and what it meant. By the time I arrived in Minneapolis, I was Bob Dylan, and it felt like I had always been that person. This ability to reinvent myself, to try on different personas, became a key part of who I was as an artist. I didn't want to be stuck in one role. I wanted to explore different sides of myself. I would dive into a role completely, but when it was time to move on, I would let it go and become something new. It was a way of staying fresh and avoiding burnout. I saw how other artists, like Hank Williams and Elvis Presley, had burned out because they couldn't let go of their personas. I didn't want that to happen to me. When I decided to start writing my own songs, I knew I wanted to do something different. I wanted to find a way to write songs that were both new and rooted in the past. I started digging into old newspapers and books, looking for the language and ideas of earlier times. I wasn't interested in the history or politics as much as I was in the way people spoke and thought. I wanted to find a way to bring that old language and spirit into my new songs. In September 1961, I met John Hammond, a producer at Columbia Records. He offered me a recording contract, which was a big surprise. I had assumed I would record for Folkways, but they had already turned me down. Columbia was a big deal, and signing with them meant I was stepping into a whole new world, but I knew it was the right move. John Hammond was a visionary, and I trusted him to help me take my music to the next level. That's how I started my journey as a songwriter, always looking for new ways to express myself and connect with people. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready for the challenge. I met Hammond through Carolyn Hester, a folk singer from Texas. She had been married to Richard Farina, who later married Joan Baez's sister, Mimi. Richard died young, but that's a story for another time. Hester and I first crossed paths at a rehearsal for her recording session. I was supposed to play the harmonica, and I was more focused on the music and helping my friend than on anything else. Hester had a connection to Buddy Holly, which impressed me a lot. Buddy was like royalty to me, and I felt that Hester was a bridge to that world of rock and roll, which was my first love. During the rehearsal, I didn't really notice Hammond watching me. I was too caught up in the music. I didn't think about getting signed or becoming famous. I just wanted to do what I loved. I was more interested in becoming the next ramblin' Jack Elliott or Pete Seeger, the great folk singers who inspired me. I didn't see myself as a potential pop star. The idea seemed far-fetched, even though I had a deep-seated love for rock and roll. When the rehearsal ended, Hammond casually asked if I was signed to a label. I shook my head and didn't hold my breath for his response. It was almost as if I didn't want to think about it. I wanted to keep my focus on the music and the authenticity that I valued so much, but I wasn't completely oblivious. I knew that meeting the right people could make a difference, and I had a knack for knowing who those people were. One of those people was Robert Shelton, the folk critic for the New York Times. Suze Rotolo, my partner at the time, said I was very good at picking out important people. I knew what I wanted and I could focus. Shelton's review in the New York Times was like a tidal wave. It changed everything. The review called me bursting at the seams with talent, and I carried it around in my pocket like a treasure. It was the first time I felt recognized by the folk community, and it gave me a sense of belonging. A few days after the review, I had a recording session with Hester. Hammond was there, and he offered me a recording contract with Columbia Records. I said yes, but I tried to play it cool. Inside, I was jumping for joy. It felt like my heart had leaped up to the sky. I couldn't believe it. It was a dream come true, but I didn't show it. I kept my cool, just like I always did. Hammond was the perfect person to sign me. He had an aristocratic background, but a taste for edgy music. He could see something in me that others might have missed. Columbia Records was a big deal, and signing with them felt like I was entering a new world. It was a step into the mainstream, but it didn't feel like I was selling out. It felt like I was being recognized for who I was. After I signed with Columbia, Hammond introduced me to Billy James, the head publicist. Billy was all about facts and straight answers. He wanted me to give him information for promotional materials, but I didn't want to play that game. I didn't feel the need to explain myself to anyone. Billy represented a world that was rigid and linear, while I was all about the mystery and the intuition. I couldn't just give him the facts. I wanted to keep things a bit mysterious. One evening after I signed with Columbia, I was in the office of Lou Levy, a music publisher. I was singing songs I was making up on the spot. I rearranged verses from old blues ballads, added a line here or there, and slapped a title on it. I didn't see myself as a conventional songwriter, but I was creating something new. I didn't think about it too much. It just came naturally. I started with a line and turned it into something else. It wasn't about craft. It was about intuition. I was free to create without constraints, and that's how I wanted to keep it. I spent countless hours trying to do what other people had been doing. I wasn't just practicing. I was living and breathing music. I played morning, noon, and night, often falling asleep with my guitar in my hands. By the time I made those demos for my manager Albert Levy in 1961, creating new songs out of existing elements felt natural to me. It's something very few songwriters can do well, especially on the spot. But for me, it was effortless because I had immersed myself so deeply in the songs of others that they were a big part of my daily life. More than spoken language, these songs were how I related to the world around me. My first song of any real importance was Song to Woody, an homage to Woody Guthrie, who had become a friend and mentor. It's completely characteristic of me that what I consider the first of maybe 1,000 songs I would write was a tribute to my biggest influence. I was deeply grounded in the history and tradition of folk music, and this rootedness gave my songs a gravitas and authority that many in popular music lacked. I judged my own songs by how meaningful they were to me. I wasn't focused on the mechanics of songwriting or the lyrics and melodies I borrowed from others. Instead, I was focused on the layers of meaning behind the songs. If I could summon the right feeling, the structure of the song would come naturally. If a song didn't feel meaningful to me, it probably wouldn't connect with my audience either. Woody Guthrie pointed out the starting place for my identity and destiny. Writing Song to Woody as an homage to him wasn't about establishing myself as a songwriter. It was about acknowledging my debt to the past. I didn't see myself as a professional songwriter, but as someone with a deep passion for songs and the people who create them. This subtle difference allowed me to create in a way that felt genuine and true to myself. My first album, Bob Dylan, was released in March 1962. It was mostly traditional songs and was initially a commercial failure, selling less than 5,000 copies. My producer, John Hammond, remained confident in me, even as others at Columbia started calling me Hammond's Folly. The failure of that first album taught me to trust my own instincts more and less in others. I realized that making an album was different from performing in folk clubs. I didn't want to give away anything that was truly dear to me on that first record, but after hearing it, I knew I needed to write my own songs in earnest to unlock my full potential. In 1963, I recorded the Freewheelin Bob Dylan, which would launch me to fame. Songs like Blowin' in the Wind, Girl from the North Country, Masters of War, A Hard Rain's Agin a Fall, and Don't Think Twice, It's All Right were a huge leap forward. These songs weren't just great, they were new and different. They combined the folk idiom with the attitude of rock and roll and the beats, and it helped that I had a unique look and voice. I had shed my baby fat, and my gaunt, angular face was becoming iconic. My relationship with Joan Baez, the queen of folk music, also elevated my status to king. The success of Blowin' in the Wind by Peter, Paul, and Mary was a big deal for the folk community. It was rare for a hardcore folk singer like me to have a song at the top of the charts. This success set the stage for the 1963 Newport Folk Festival, where I was crowned the Prince of Folk Music. I carried a bullwhip and cracked it, asserting my authority. The festival was the peak of the folk movement, and folk music had become one of the most successful genres. I was its prime exemplar, but 1963 wasn't all smooth sailing. I was breaking up with Suze Rotolo, my first love, who had miscarried our child. To make matters worse, a Newsweek article unmasked me as Bobby Zimmerman, a middle-class Jewish boy with a fake accent. It seemed like a death blow to my carefully crafted image. The article devastated me and marked the beginning of my contentious relationship with the press, but I managed to turn this defeat into a triumph. Instead of apologizing, I embraced the chameleon-like image. My friends and fellow folk singers didn't judge me harshly. They understood that shape-shifting was part of a tradition. I was a receiver, a medium for the ever-changing nature of time. This ability to change and adapt was seen as a strength, not a weakness. I took risks with my identity that no one else was willing to take. I was always looking into myself, asking what I wanted to do next. It was brave to experiment with my soul, and it allowed me to bring repressed modes of consciousness back into the culture. My mercurial nature, which some saw as a flaw, was actually a profound act of courage. It was 1963, and the world around me was changing. Kennedy's assassination hit us all hard, like a punch in the gut. It felt like the end of an era. The cozy, safe world we knew was shattered. The Beatles arrived, and it was like a fresh breeze, but the old world was gone. Kennedy was more than just a president to us. He was a father figure, a hero. Losing him was like losing a piece of ourselves. I didn't set out to lead the counterculture, but somehow, my songs seemed to capture what everyone was feeling. A Hard Rain's Agin a Fall, and The Times They Are A-Changin spoke to the chaos and change that was coming. People thought I wrote those songs about the big events, but they were more about the feeling in the air, the sense that everything was about to shift. My third album, The Times They Are A-Changin, was a continuation of the themes from Freewheelin. Songs like With God on Our Side and The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll were my way of calling out the injustices I saw. But with my fourth album, Another Side of Bob Dylan, something changed. I was going through a tough breakup with Suze Rodolo, and the songs became more personal. All I Really Wanna Do and It Ain't Me Babe were about my own struggles, not just the world's. The way people saw me was changing too. I went from being the scruffy folk singer to this hard-edged guy. It wasn't a choice, really. Fans started looking to me for answers I didn't have. They wanted me to be their leader, their hero, but I was just a guy trying to make music. The pressure was intense, and sometimes I lashed out. I was mean to people, especially to Joan Baez, but it was a defense mechanism. I was young, and it was all too much. In 2012, I said, those days were cruel. It was a tough time, but it also pushed me to create some of my best work. Songs like Positively 4th Street and Like a Rolling Stone came out of that period. I was breaking free from the folk scene, and it wasn't easy. At the Newport Folk Festival in 1964, the tension was palpable. People were upset that I was moving away from political songs to more personal ones. But I couldn't stay in the same place. I had to grow, to explore new sounds and ideas. Silber, the editor of Sing Out, wrote me an open letter, saying he was worried I was losing touch with my roots. He thought I was being corrupted by fame, but I knew I had to follow my own path. If I gave the audience what they wanted all the time, my music would die. I had to keep pushing, keep evolving. The folk establishment felt betrayed, but I was just trying to stay true to myself. I didn't want to be a spokesman or a leader. I just wanted to make music that spoke to the moment, and the moment was changing fast. The world was getting more fragmented, and so was I. The old ways were giving way to something new, something I couldn't fully understand but had to explore. In the end, it was all part of the journey, the music, the changes, the pain, and the growth. It was a time of great change, and I was right in the middle of it, trying to make sense of it all through my songs. The road from folk to rock was a winding one, and it's a journey I never could have made without the guidance of giants like Johnny Cash and the deep well of American music. Back in 1964, at the Newport Folk Festival, I met Johnny Cash, a man who was more than just a singer to me. He was a figure of awe, a legend. Meeting him was the highlight of my life, and when he gave me his guitar, it felt like a sacred moment. In the old country tradition, being given a guitar is a big honor. It felt like a sign that I was meant to take my music in a new direction. With Johnny's blessing, I felt I could blend the worlds of folk, country, and rock and roll into something new. The world seemed to be telling me that I was destined to create a new genre, something that would become known as folk rock. But to me, it was just rock and roll, and it was where I belonged. Following year, from Newport 1964 to Newport 1965, was a transformative time. I recorded Bringing It All Back Home, filmed Don't Look Back, and of course, played at Newport 1965 with an electric band. It was a moment that felt like a rebirth, a return to the music that had always been a part of me. Even before I went electric, I had a deep connection to rock and roll. Back in 1962, during the recording sessions for the Freewheelin Bob Dylan, I recorded a version of Elvis Presley's That's All Right. It's a song that, if you didn't know when it was recorded, you might think it was from my electric period. It shows that rock and roll was always a part of me, and the transition to electric music was a natural progression, not a betrayal. I've always been honest about my journey. Folk music was a crucial part of my life, and I learned so much from it, but it was also a stepping stone. I knew I couldn't stay in the folk world forever. I wanted to explore the deeper roots of American music, the blues, country, and rock and roll. When I went electric, it felt like I was coming home. I was returning to the music that had always been a part of me, the music that spoke to my soul. Some people saw my move to rock and roll as a betrayal, and they called me names, but I knew what I was doing. I told an audience in London that folk music was just an interruption, a useful phase in my journey. It's not that I didn't care about folk music, it's that I had a bigger vision. I wanted to create something that would touch people in a new way, something that would bring the energy of rock and roll to the poetic essence of folk. In the end, the folk music scene was like a paradise that I had to leave, just like Adam had to leave the Garden of Eden. The world was changing, and I was changing with it. I went straight into the chaos, the thunderhead of a world, and it was both treacherous and wide open. The music I created with the band on Bringing It All Back Home was a new kind of rock and roll, a music that was fun, spontaneous, and full of life. It was a music that lifted me from the role of a lone poet to a leader of a new movement. A movement that was all about self-transformation and the exploration of new possibilities. So, when a teenage fan asked me if I was going to play The Times They Are A-Changin, and told me that subterranean homesick blues didn't sound like me, I understood her concern, but I also knew that I had to follow my own path. I told her that as long as you know what you're doing and it feels right, you don't have to worry about what anyone else thinks. It's a lesson that stayed with me, and I hope it's a lesson that can guide you too. Follow your heart, and don't let anyone else's judgment hold you back. The world is wide open, and you can create your own paradise.